Hi, guys. Welcome to Refugee from Russia podcast. I hope you're doing well. I wanted to share 8 things that I learned as a Muslim refugee from Russia about Syria. I'll be honest, before I began researching, I knew very little about Syria. Here are the things I knew in general. I knew Syria had a war, that Bashar Assad was someone in Syria. Also, the most popular Syrian person I knew of was Mona Haider. Oh, I also knew that Russia had a military base there. But after research, here are the 8 things that I learned about Syria and the Syrian Civil War. The first thing that I learned as a Muslim refugee from Russia about Syria and what's going on there is that conflict in Syria did not start with the Assad family. Assad's family coming to power was at first in opposition to the previous military leader al-Sarraj and his iron fist. Al-Sarraj was the person who for the first time introduced blood in Syrian politics. One prominent example of such is killing of al-Hulu, a popular Lebanese political figure and the head of the Lebanese Communist Party. That incident shook the Syrians and Lebanese. But when al-Sarraj was finally arrested, Nazim al-Qudsi becomes the president. However, a coup happens right after. He is overthrown, another person becomes the president, Salah Jadid. But then again, another coup happens, and Hafiz Assad then takes over the country and becomes the president in 1970. What baffles me in this whole thing is why Arab leaders who use coups to overthrow dictators historically then go ahead and become dictators themselves. Honestly, I hate men. I hate men in power nowadays. It doesn't matter if you're a Christian Joe or an Arab Hafiz, because once you get the power, these men cannot stand being wrong. If someone points at their flaws, what do? Well, let's ask Saudis about Khashoggi, or let's ask Bashar about Bashar al-Assad, or Russia about Politkovskaya, or Turkey about Hrant Dink, or Iran about Ruth Sam. Only US, I think, didn't get lucky enough and didn't get its hands on Assange. Otherwise, he would have shared the same faith with the previous people I mentioned. I want to say, it's okay to be wrong sometimes. And admitting that you're wrong is not a weakness. And I know some people, especially red pillars, say, oh, women are weak, women are emotional. Maybe we are emotional, but we're definitely not weak. If we don't like someone, we don't send bombs over their heads. The most that we can do is maybe not talk to them. Wouldn't it be great if we were the ones who were in power of these countries? Maybe we just would have had many countries in the world that wouldn't speak to each other. I'm not opposed to that idea. Speaking of women, Assad's wife, Asma, in an email to a prominent Qatari royal figure, in 2011, when she was asked, and I quote, "You're doing such a great work. It can all be lost on the basis of weeks of bad policy. Honestly, how can it be? How can we be of help?" End quote. Asma replies, "Life is not fair, my friend. And at the end of the day, there is a reality we have to deal with." End quote. No, you don't. And honestly, for women of men who are in power, I think you can easily change their behaviors. How? Don't sleep with them. I mean, maybe I'm exaggerating, but at the same time, when I heard Assad was courting the women of his dead brother Basil after he passed away, and allegedly Assad had an obsession with women, I wonder if people like that in power don't care about life, maybe they will care not having anyone to sleep with. Maybe not a crazy idea to think about. Number 3, the thing I learned as a Muslim refugee about Syria. The Syria was at a gruesome war, and I did not know how bad it was. Take an example of the prisons in Syria. There are 2 very known, notorious prisons. There is Tadmur and there is Sidnaya. Amnesty International revealed in 2017 that Mukhabarat, which can be considered as a Russian FSB, executed up to 13,000 people. And they religiously hang people twice a week. They had a tradition, if we can even call it like that. But I guess one of the most prominent examples of how deadly the war was in Syria was the incident that happened in the city of Hama. It's called Hama Massacre. Between 10,000 and 40,000 people were killed, many in execution styles. Point number 4. What I learned as a Muslim refugee from Russia about Syria. Conflict in Syria was not only about the military groups like HTS, SNA, the Syrian National Army backed by Turkey, or SDF, the Syrian Democratic Army led by Kurds and backed by the US, or SAA, the Syrian Arab Army led by Assad. The heart of the conflict are people like Mazen al-Hamada, Mazen Darwish, Yara Badr, Razan Zaytoun, Khaled al-Khani, Sali Masalmeh. And I'm sorry if I butchered any of their names, I apologize in advance. The conflict was represented by people from all walks of lives. People that organized protests, people that helped the people who were in prisons, and people who just couldn't stay indifferent. Point number 5, what I've learned as a Muslim refugee from Russia about Syria. Some Syrians love Putin. About a year or so ago, I was invited to someone's house for a quick dinner. It was an Arab Muslim household. We ate, we had tea, and then we talked. Because I'm a refugee from Russia, I get asked a lot about Russia. So tell us, what's going on in Russia? How are Muslims treated there? Obviously, I wasn't going to go into a full monologue about Chechnya being the number 3 place in Russia where people are being disappeared, or that Muslims from Dagestan disproportionately being sent in the war in Ukraine, or the theatrics with Putin kissing Quran. As a great line from Kat Dahila's song Gangsta says, "You impress me none." People are not that impressed when so much more happening around. So I simply said, things aren't that great. Immediately one of the hosts says, you know, in the Arab world, we have a saying for him, for Putin. We call him Abu Ali Putin. I thought, that was weird. Why? Is this because of hatred or respect? Recently, when I was researching about Syria, I read the book by Sam Dagger, Assad, or We Burned the Country. In the book, he talks about how this term came about. You know, in Syria, we give Abu Ali to the tough and brave men, says Bashar's Minister of Information to Russia Today. He was raised to the ranks of other great men, Bashar, Basal, Hafez, Maher, Hassan, Nasrallah, and Ali Khamenei. Abu Ali, tough and brave? Tough without tender is reckless, guys. Brave without balance is chaos. I would call him Abu Zulm instead, because strength without compassion is oppression. Point number 6, what I learned as a Muslim refugee from Russia about Syria. Why was Russia in Syria? Officially, to fight terrorism. After Bashar asked Putin to intervene to fight terrorism, he did it from the Caspian Sea that sits in the northern Caucasus, the area that has been occupied in the Caucasian War in the 1800s. Missiles targeting SDF, US-backed rebels, not targeting HTS, guys, or SNA, as Sam Dagger writes in his book. You can read about this on page 407. There is a saying there. Sometimes you had 5 or 6 jets bombing us at the same time. It was absolutely terrifying. By the way, it's a quote from Ali Othman, an army defector, who was fighting with the US-backed rebel fraction. No Al-Qaeda's Nusra, that later became HTS. Let me tell you what that means. When Russia was saying we're fighting terrorism, they were not fighting or bombing the HTS that previously was linked to Al-Qaeda. You would think logically, why aren't you doing that? Well, I guess the ultimate motives were not exactly fighting terrorism. It's more of a selective terrorism fighting. Honestly, we've seen that very, very many times, not just in Russia, but everywhere in the world as well. It's almost as if terrorism became the number one enemy after communism. Because when USSR collapsed, you have to find an enemy, right? Point number 7 that I learned as a Muslim refugee from Russia about Syria. Pro-Assad forces were not the only one wanting to work with Russia. Anti-Assad forces did too. Manaf Tlas, defector, former member of Assad's inner circle, met with Deputy Foreign Minister Bagdanov in Paris. Manaf hoped to leverage Russia's historical ties with Syria to reconstruct Syrian army, neutralize extremists on both sides, pro and anti-Assad. He believed that if US and Russia reached an agreement, Assad would stand down. Here is how I know Russia wasn't fighting terrorism. Bogdanov said to Manaf, and I quote, "We want to bring back honorable patriots like you to the army. We're not attached to Bashar al-Assad," end quote. Point number 8, what I learned as a Muslim refugee from Russia about Syria and about this conflict in general. You cannot trust any American or Russian coverage, for that matter, on this conflict. They are underqualified. They possess the level of nuance of a toothpick, if you ask me. Recently, I saw Clarissa Ward holding a hand of a prisoner released after Assad's regime fell. What a great sign. What a great journalistic opportunity to express empathy, to say something, to ask something. But she can't. Yet Larissa Ward, who speaks zero of Arabic, gets all the promotions, increased yearly bonuses because of her coverage. How are you covering what you don't understand? Before you say, oh, but she does speak Arabic, conversational. I'm taking Spanish classes right now, and the other day teacher asked us, how many languages do we speak? One girl said 3, Russian, English, and Spanish. Yet when she was asked to say something in English, she said, I watch movies with my husband in English with captions. She said it in Russian, clearly dodging a question. Girl, you can't speak English. You know, so many people say this, oh, I can speak English, or I speak language, but they actually don't. To be clear, Clarissa is not a bad person. She seems like a lovely human being who probably gets in trouble from time to time from her boss for being too outspoken. But just like CNN wouldn't send a non-Spanish speaking journalist to cover 2010 San Fernando massacre, you shouldn't send Clarissa to cover a massacre in Syria. Can we collectively agree as a society we need some standards when covering Middle East? You know, I almost feel like half of the Islamophobia in America is caused by this gross unprofessionalism. Who is to blame? I don't blame Clarissa. I blame the internal systems in place at CNN. They remind me of Первый канал in Russia. The board of directors gets to decide the roster of journalists based on how much their coverage might defend the donors, not based on accuracy. Once I stopped being an angry grandma about the media coverage and the media lying to us, I turned to the Arab coverage to compare. I looked at journalists and anchors at Al Jazeera. Honestly, I'm not a fan of Qatar. On the contrary, I have more in common with an average American than a wealthy Qatari spoiled brat. But I want to say, let's give credit where credit is due. The list of credentials of people that come on the panels to speak about Syria, absolutely incredible. I'm going to link a video that you can watch just to see for yourself who was invited by an Al Jazeera news anchor to talk about Syria. I have to say, though, one thing about Al Jazeera. Because Al Jazeera is so nuanced, at times it adds massive complexity to an average viewer. Like, I didn't understand sometimes half of what I was watching. There has to be a balance for people like me who just started to learn. So, there you have it. 8 things I learned about Syria and Syria's civil war. Now, like I said in the beginning, I'm no expert. I just started learning about this. And honestly, it's kind of shameful to say that while I'm a Muslim, I know so little about Syria. And I think the same can be said about other parts of the world. However, if there is more for me to learn, feel free to share that in the comment section. And let me know if you want me to make a part 2 after I do additional research.